Okay, good morning. I guess it could be a good afternoon, a good evening to everybody. Welcome to actually episode one of the Visto show. Thanks for tuning in. I'm lucky to be joined by guest Sonia Mirbaha, principal partner at SMB Immigration Law. Sonia, thank you very much for joining me on the first public episode of the Visto show.
It's a pleasure, Josh. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm so excited to talk about all the new, things that immigration has in place these days for foreign workers and for foreign individuals in general.
Absolutely. So, the agenda that you can see on the side of the screen, we'll do a quick immigration update, basically running through what you need to know, what is the state of the union right now for study permits, work permits, and express entry. Then Sonia and I will get into a more in depth discussion on the state of immigration in general right now, where we think it's going in the future, all of that fun stuff. And then, of course, if there's any questions, we're more than happy to take them in the chat. We might wait to take some of them at the end, but feel free to say hello in the chat, drop an immigration question, anything like that, and we'll make sure to get to that either during or at the end. So, to begin, Sonia, I'm going to jump in first, talk quickly about study permits. What you need to know today, keep in mind today is December 4th, 2020, in case you're watching a recording of this. So, the latest to keep in mind with regards to study permits is as of October 20th, international students can now travel into Canada, which is really exciting if you have your study permit approved, you have your travel document that's necessary, either your TRV or your ETA, and the school that you're intending to study at is on the IRCC approved list with a proper COVID readiness plan in place. So that's really good news. If you're an international student, that option is still available to you. Pretty much what will apply to all the updates we're going to mention is you may want to expect delays for processing times, but study permit processing is moving forward as per usual, again, maybe with some delays. Sonia, I'm going to pass it over to you to give us a quick update on what is the state of the union if someone is looking to apply for a work permit. How is that process maybe different, if at all? What are you seeing with processing times? All that kind of fun stuff.
Thanks, Josh. So before jumping into that, I think something that's worth mentioning is the introduction of the ArriveCan app, and that kind of applies to all the travelers that are coming to Canada, regardless of being, Canadian PR or temporary resident visa holder or citizen or anything that you are, as long as you're coming through, the airport of entry. Well, they kind of extended it to land port of entries too, but essentially it started with the airport of entry. So effective November 21st, 2020, whoever that's arriving into Canada, they have to download ArriveCan app before coming to Canada. So essentially this app is getting the contact information, the quarantine plan for people that are coming to Canada. If there is asking questions about the COVID-19 symptoms before arriving to Canada. So everything has to be filled up through the app. Once people are coming to the port of entry, the CBSA officer, Canada Border Services officer, will take a look at the app just to make sure that it's being completed fully and all the information is there. Failure to comply with that will have consequences ranging from verbal warnings to $1,000 fine. So anybody who's coming to Canada, make sure you download that. It's available for Android, for Apple, and on other platforms as well. Going back to work permit holders in Canada, one of the big news for people who are inside Canada is that whoever that has a visitor status, and this applies to people that have been in Canada up until August 24th, 2020, visitor status in Canada, that means you could be under any kind of status as a business visitor, as somebody who has a super visa or any other kind of visa. You could apply for work permit having a valid job offer from an employer in Canada. So that work permit could be LMIE based or it could be LMIE exempt, depending on the situation. But this guideline came into effect just to avoid the flag polling. As many of you might know, the travel restrictions sort of banned the flag polling starting from the beginning of the pandemic. So immigration kind of facilitated this so that people don't have to travel back and forth to their country or flag poll. This was great. great. This was a great news for a lot of people in Canada. The guideline is in place until March 31st, 2021, and it might get extended afterwards. Who knows? We don't know. But up until that point, people in Canada can apply for work permit. This is probably one of the major news in the world of, work permit that came into effect. There are other little bits and pieces of information that are coming out. Everybody knows immigration has been so fluid since the beginning. But I mean, in terms of, the bulk part of it, this is probably something that people could look into.
Right. And can you give us a little bit of a finger on the pulse, Sonia, about are Canadian companies still hiring? Are they still sponsoring? And what have you seen in terms of processing times from a outside or inside of the country type perspective?
Yeah, so that's a good question. At the beginning of the pandemic, things didn't kind of hit to, for the lack of the better word, didn't hit properly on the corporation. So they had continuously, hiring from foreign workers, but then going through the pandemic, they kind of realized that, oh, there are so many restrictions in terms of people coming from, which country they're coming from, US versus the other part of the world. And they have 2 weeks of quarantine that they have to do, and they're not supposed to work within that 2 weeks period. And so many do's and don'ts. So they kind of, employers kind of become reluctant of, let's say, hiring people from outside of Canada. And so things slow down. With all the travel restrictions sort of slowly being lifted and kind of coming out of this pandemic mode slowly, I can see that a lot of my clients sort of leaning towards hiring more from foreign workers. Within the pandemic, within the past couple of months, again, local market has been sort of active in terms of people who lost their job in Canada. So companies were not really looking into hiring from outside of Canada per se, but like I said, the direction is sort of shifting now. Processing times, there was so much delay on the processing side of things, and that's because a lot of people, consulate staff, were not working full time. Were working remotely. It wasn't efficient. The process was not efficient, and they were mostly sort of focusing on the essential workers, but that also kind of being shifted slowly. We can see that in some countries such as India, the vac centers are opening up slowly. People can do their biometrics. I can see that, responses are coming on my own clients' cases from the Canadian consulate in India. So it looks like things are moving a little bit right now. I'm just hoping that within the next, few months, and with the promises that we're hearing from the immigration minister in Canada and the number of immigrants that they're expecting to get in 2021, things are going to be, fast-tracked a bit more, and hopefully we get back to the normal stage that we were before the pandemic.
Absolutely. And we do have a quick comment and question from Varun, who says, "Hi, Josh and Sonia. Any updates on travel restrictions from the U.S. to Canada?" Any thoughts on that, Sonia? I mean, I believe over the last month or two, it's been a lot of extensions, right, in terms of similar restrictions and exemptions being carried over. But anything specifically of note from the U.S. to Canada that you can recall?
So it really depends on, what kind of category you're trying to come under. The orders in council have been active pieces of law since the beginning, and that kind of dictates all the relationships and all the do's and don'ts that the applicants have to follow. Right now, the order in council is still in place until, I believe, December 21st for people coming from US. If you're coming to work in Canada, as long as you can prove that the work is categorized under non-discretionary and non-optional, you would be able to pass through the border and come into Canada. There's no problem with. I've had so many successful cases. If you
Nice.
are dependent family member, again, there has been an introduction of an extended family member to the process, which is another thing to discuss. But if you're a dependent family member of whoever that's in Canada right now by study permit, work permit, or PR, then again, as long as you prove the relationship, you would be able to come through. So it really goes down to, what category you're trying to pick and under which category you're coming to Canada. But I wouldn't rule it out. I would say that there are still ways to come to Canada from US.
Absolutely, yeah. And Varun, the travel update question is just, it's a bit of a loaded one because it really depends on so many factors. I'll also add in a note and segue to Express Entry, where if you are coming directly from the US, you can actually travel into Canada if your PR gets approved through Express Entry, which is kind of nice. If you're not coming directly through the US, so that does not include connecting flights, then you are actually not allowed to travel into Canada, even if you have a PR approval and you're in a country other than the United States. We're going to talk a little bit more about the scores and that as well. The last three draws for Express Entry being 469, 472, and 478 respectively, in that order from most recent to least recent, which is really exciting news if you're looking to come to Canada either from outside of the country or you're inside of the country as an international student or a temporary foreign worker, and you're looking to kind of graduate to that PR status. Really good news because that number has dropped a lot. The last two scores specifically have been the biggest ever, inviting 5,000 people to apply. So that's another kind of sign from Immigration Canada saying, we're committed to that big target that they have over the next 3 years, which is 400,000 or more permanent residents per year over the next 3 years. So with that, let's get into more of the discussion phase, Sonia. I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts on the current state of immigration, right? We work in an area of law where typically there's not that many updates, right? Maybe a program gets added, maybe a program gets changed. Every couple of weeks there's an Express Entry draw. Otherwise, we just kind of do our job, right? And now COVID hits, and there's probably been more changes to immigration and travel restrictions in the last 10 months than the last 10 years. This is what I was telling somebody earlier today. What are your thoughts on immigration right now as it stands in Canada, just working in the industry day in and day out?
So to your point, I mean, starting from the very beginning of pandemic, immigration has been a very active area of law. I would say the most active out of every other area, at least in Canada. News, if you remember, news used to come on an hourly basis at the beginning of the pandemic. And even for us practitioners, it was really hard to stay on top of it because something that was making sense today was not necessarily the case tomorrow. And so, I mean, luckily we came out of that phase and news are not coming as fast as before, but there are still so many changes that are coming and more changes expected in 2021. With the level plans that got introduced a few weeks ago by the Canadian government, they're expecting to bring immigrants, 401,000 immigrants to be exact, for the year 2021. And that was unprecedented. I mean, back in 1913, there was a case that they brought this many people, but that was it. And then afterwards, it was always been less amount of people. So they're sort of making everything a lot more flexible, a lot of programs. They're going to introduce a lot of pilot programs that kind of, I'm assuming, kind of covering the people that are falling through the cracks and are not being able to apply for PR because they don't have enough scores or they don't meet the eligibility criteria. So it's going to be all positive news for sure in terms of Canadian immigration. One thing that COVID had, I mean, so many miseries that it brought to humanity and on the face of the planet. But one of the positive points was that, or at least, in the context of immigration, was that it kind of pushed the government officials to digitalize things, to introduce more technology into the process and to take away that paper application that used to take months and months to process. They are introducing a lot of pilot technology programs. they're talking about it for 2021. So where in case the officers, immigration officers, if they want to interview people, they could do it over the technology. They don't have to really, necessarily schedule a face-to-face kind of interview. They're taking away the online application processes for spousal sponsorships for many other immigration programs. I mean, they would have gone that way anyways, but COVID kind of pushed them to jump on it faster. And that was one of the really, really positive effects of this COVID pandemic so far.
Absolutely. It is and will continue to be very interesting. We have Iram is in live, says hello, nice to see you guys. Thanks very much, Iram, for tuning in. I mean, I'm kind of conflicted in terms of there's a few things kind of like butting heads here, right? Like on one hand, we have the increasing number of immigrants and just people traveling into the country. On the other hand, we have a health scare, right? A health concern with the country, and those are kind of conflicting. And at the same time, too, the government trying to create all these new pilot programs and new avenues in terms of immigration. And I'm almost of the belief that like we actually have a lot of the right programs in place. They just need to do more processing, right? Because one way to get more people to get PR is just bring the express entry score down and process more applications, right? Like you don't then need to have to create a brand new program and all these new processes. What do you think about that, Sonia? Because that's something that I've, been thinking about a lot. And obviously, I don't really, have anyone's ear in IRCC. But I'm of the firm belief that Canada has actually set up really good immigration programs. They cover a wide spectrum. They're not all perfect, but I don't think anybody's is. But if they could kind of tighten up maybe the processing aspect, they can just open up the programs they already have in place, right? Because my concern is they add new programs to address specific people or specific needs, but then they don't have the resources to actually process them all. So what are your thoughts on both of those big questions? But the issue of lots of numbers in travel versus safety concerns, and then also the creation of all these new programs, even though I think we have a pretty good amount of good ones right now.
Yeah, so I know I hear that. To answer your concern, there was this announcement, I think back in September 24th by RCC, that they're increasing the number of decision makers up to 66% to process spousal applications. And spousal applications had a really high rate starting, with the beginning of the pandemic, because a lot of spouses were outside of Canada, working outside of Canada, where the other spouse who was a PR or citizen have been in Canada, so they were trying to come to join the family or reunionize with the family, but they couldn't because of the travel restrictions. So IRCC kind of realized that, and they upped the capacity up to 66% to make sure that those applications are getting processed faster. Mm-hmm. Also, like I said, they introduced, they haven't announced it formally yet, but they're kind of in the process of digitalizing the paper applications. Again, that's a really good step forward. Many of the applications, to be honest with you, are not, paper application is not an option. They're all being filed online. But for those that are, they're trying to take away that. So these are all like good steps, positive steps that they're taking to answer your concern, or I'm sure there are a lot of people that have the same concern. In terms of contradicting, information, the fact that, you're trying to accept more clients. I'm talking about myself, more immigrants into the country, but at the same time, you have all these health concerns. A lot of people are talking about that. A lot of people are saying that, Canada had this many target immigrants for 2020, they couldn't make up to that because of all the restrictions and, trying to avoid foreigners to come to the country. Yet you're hitting higher target in 2021. Mm-hmm. Travel restrictions are still ongoing. And how would you expect to grab those many people into Canada? I guess I don't have any solid answer to that. I guess with the introduction of vaccines, which are hopefully coming into play by the end of December or beginning of next year, that will kind of solve the problem. I mean, Canada started processing visa applications. That's also a very good positive step forward because,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, visa applications were totally under halt since the beginning of, the travel restrictions. But right now, on a very occasional basis, depending on how urgent your travel is required to Canada or what's the purpose of the travel. They started reviewing those applications too, and I'm sure that it's just going to grow more and more as the months are going by. So there are some steps, but I mean, what can you do when you still
Yeah.
have this health concern? Like, how far can you, develop your programs, or how far can you offer more
Yeah, it's
programs?
it's and don't get me wrong, it's a slippery slope, and I'm pretty
Right,
happy I don't have to make these decisions, right? A big balance between essentially health and safety of the people that are already in your country and the economics of your country, which is also very important, right? I don't know, I'm not going to make a call on whether one is more important than the
right,
other, but one of the reasons for these very, very high numbers and targets that continue to rise is that we need more workers, right? We need more skilled workers if we want to continue growing. Eventually, we will get a vaccine, or we will get through COVID, and then reality of economics are going to set in, which is if we want these tech companies and every other type of company to continue growing, we need more skilled talent. Let's take a quick pause here because we do have a few people joining us. Iram, Lovejot, and Charles also says hello. And we got a few questions. So hello to everybody and thank you for tuning in. Iram says her and her sister are trying really hard to immigrate to Canada through a PNP and also to get a job offer from a Canadian employer. Sonia, what are your thoughts on that? Because this is a probably the most common issue that I see people run into when they're trying to come to Canada. They do a lot of research, they're looking around, and eventually they kind of get to the point where they realize that the only options are employer specific, right? Either a job offer that will get them an LMIA and a work permit, or a job offer that will get them a PNP nomination so they can come through express entry. The reality is that's hard on a regular day, right? You throw COVID on top of it and the job market as it stands right now, and it's even harder. So the first thing we have to acknowledge is how extremely, extremely difficult it is to find a job from outside of Canada in regular times, let alone in the middle of COVID. But do you have any insight, Sonia, as somebody who works very closely with employers who do hire, probably not as often in the last 10 months, but any advice or insights you can give to individuals who will hopefully one day benefit from maybe getting a job offer from outside of the country?
So it's really hard to say. I mean, I often, when I get requests like that in my own practice, I often refer them to some of the recruitment firms in Canada that are focused on tech talent, bringing tech talent from outside of Canada. So it's out of my forte. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just link them to those people. It's their expertise, and they're linked to many of the employers in Canada. So I guess in terms of finding an employer in Canada, that would be the way to go. What I wanted to add is that the PMP programs, I mean, the reason behind introducing PMP programs was for people, for applicants who are not, filling all those requirements for the express entry application, and therefore require some extra points to be able to qualify. So there comes the PMP program. Now we've got a stream specifically in Ontario, and I'm sure that other provinces might have similar streams as well, that are kind of focusing on foreign workers coming to Canada. They don't necessarily have to have a job offer in Canada. They could be, they're relying on their background experience, on their education, on, the factors that are already carrying. And they just apply through that stream. And once they get selected, then there you go, bingo, all of a sudden they have 600 points and they're more than qualify to apply for express entry. Having said that, some of these streams are very competitive because there are many applicants that are applying from outside of Canada, many qualified applicants. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes the scores are, you know, going up and up and up, and it's really hard. You know, it might be, you might as an applicant find yourself staying in a pool for months and months. But I mean, those programs are still existing for the type of people that can't, you know, land any job in Canada yet have education and kind of like falling in between. One other factor that I also have to add, and Josh, you know better than I do, that, you know, if you start manipulating with certain factors on the express entry, meaning that if you, let's say, if you have to retake your IELTS exam or English eligibility, you know, raise that score, or if you add some Canadian education, or if you add more work experience, you might be qualified. So we're really looking at how many scores each applicant is lacking,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, how can we sort of coming up with with, I guess, scores, overall scores that meet the eligibility criteria. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that finding an employer is probably not almost the case, or almost you know, the solution for it. There might be other solutions for it as well.
Absolutely. It's a good answer. And your and my solutions still don't mean they're easy, right? Some of them can still be very, very hard to do. We
Right.
do have some really good tools as well, Iram, which you may or may not have accessed in. So in the free Visto portal, we have one page completely dedicated to the CRS score with ways on how you can increase it, some of the most common ones. We also have a page completely dedicated to PNPs. So you can learn about the different PNP programs. There's even videos of me going province by province and discussing the PNPs. Last week, we also launched Visto Qualify. This is a paid tool, but it's far cheaper than booking a call with Sonia or any of the other lawyers out there. Not that I have any hate on booking calls with lawyers, especially the good ones, because they're usually more than worth the money. But if you want to take a quick look, Visto Qualify, you can find it within the Visto portal. And for $19, you can check. That's our launch promo price. We will actually do an eligibility check for more than 65 Canadian immigration programs, including all the PNPs, all in one place. Aram, hopefully that points a little bit of a clear picture for you. I also want to get to Lovejot, who asks that with 2 years of experience and a score of 461, he's kind of confused of what to do. I mean, it's hard, Lovejot, to give you too much specific experience without knowing what, you know, a little bit more about your background, right? What is your education? What is your language exam, et cetera, et cetera. I highly recommend checking the CRS page on the Visto portal to get an idea for how you could possibly increase that score. It's actually not a bad score at all, 461, with the last draw being a 469. Sonia, do you have any idea or guesses? I mean, I know nothing is certain, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on where do you think the express entry draws and scores are going to be going in the near future?
So going back to the conversation that we had earlier, that, you know, Canada is trying to attract so many immigrants for the years to come, for the next 3 years, they would certainly have to, and this was actually kind of introduced by the immigration minister too. They haven't really announced exact plans yet, but I mean, they kind of talked about it, that they might have to sort of play around with the scores that they're giving to certain factors in the express entry profile, such as, you know, the Canadian experience or the language eligibility, or, you know, other factors. They might have to play around, tweak it around a little bit, just to make sure that, you know, sort of many people, they're getting more people into the pool compared to before. Also, I think what I suspect is that on the next draws, you know, the express entry score, the threshold will drop down as a result of these changes, and as a result of sort of expanding, I guess, the capacity of the people that they're attracting, and so we'll see more flexibility. We'll see more people being able to successfully get an ITA and go through the PR process.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's hard for any one of us to give specific numbers, even though we're always asked,
Right,
right? Am I going to get an
right.
invite with this score? It's very hard to say, but I think if you just look at the math, it would be hard to justify, not thinking that the score is going to come down, right? The last two draws have come down. The last two draws have been the largest number of applicants ever invited in an express entry draw, back to back, right, two times.
Right.
And it's likely for the reasons of COVID affecting the numbers this year and the targets for the next 3 years being even higher. So do we know exactly what the scores are going to be? No, I don't think anybody could guess that unless maybe, they're Mr. Mendocino or someone in his ear himself. But I think it only makes sense that we will see a slow, I don't know how quick, but I would say slow decrease in the express entry score if we look at it kind of like trending over time. That's what I think. Let's take one more question, Sonia, if you don't mind, and then we can kind of get your last thoughts and wrap up. So we have a question from Varun who says, can somebody switch applicants and make their spouse the primary applicant instead of secondary while waiting for an ITA in one of the PNP programs? Varun, do you mean switching the primary applicant for that PNP or for your express entry profile while you're waiting for the PNP? Because with regards to express entry, you can create two profiles, right? One with your spouse as the main applicant, one with you as the main applicant. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if it's specific to a PNP, maybe let us know. Oh, he's saying for the PNP. I mean, Varun, it kind of depends on which PNP and which province.
I guess my
Do you have any
answer to the
thoughts,
question,
Sonia?
so I guess to answer his question, you won't be able to switch it during the process. You would have to cancel the initial application, which is under your name, and initiate another profile under your spouse's name. So even though a lot of people might think that, well, we are a same family member, she's got her qualifications already up there in the system, that's not how it works. Especially if you've been selected by the province for the PMP process and you've sort of, I don't know how far you've gone through the process, but then that, if you've gone that far, then for sure you would have to cancel your application, and then bring another application up, another profile up under your spouse now being a main applicant.
Yeah, and unfortunately, most of the provinces and immigration programs aren't that flexible yet. Maybe one day they'll get there. Awesome. So Sonia, just wanted to ask you one more question before we wrap up. How do you think or feel about the future of Canadian immigration? Right, we kind of talked about it right now. A lot going on. It keeps things exciting, right? It keeps us kind of on our toes every day. The next 2-3 years, I would think, will be very, very big because of these quotas. But what do you foresee for the next 5 years in Canadian immigration, and what would you tell prospective immigrants or international students or people who are thinking about coming to Canada? What would you tell them as a last piece of advice?
So it'll absolutely going to be exciting times for us as practitioners in the area and for people who are interested to come to Canada. So my piece of advice to anybody who are kind of reluctant because they feel like they don't have enough scores or because they're not sure, which category to pick, is that just go ahead, pick the one that's most suited to your situation and just apply. I won't be able to say exactly what's going to happen in terms of scores because it's still unforeseen, but my speculation is that it's going to come low, it's going to come down, and then also there are going to be more programs getting introduced, to people. For people who are in Canada, there are going to be an abundance of programs, an abundance of opportunities for them to apply for PR. So stick where you are, don't travel back. There must be something suited for you. Mm-hmm. In terms of 5 years, it's really hard to say. I mean, let's go through this, the next 3 years and see what comes out of it. All these people that are getting attracted to Canada, there must be jobs for them. There must be facilities for them. There must be housing for them. There must be, education. So I don't know. It's really hard to expect, years following the next 3 years. But for sure, for the next 3 years, I would encourage everybody who is interested to apply and who are partly qualified or mostly qualified to put their application through.
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, it's hard to foresee a month in advance what things are going to look like.
Absolutely.
So I totally
Yeah.
agree. A quick shout out to Abhishek, who's tuning in on YouTube and says hello. And Varun says that helps. Thanks a ton, Josh and Sonia. Our pleasure, Varun. So that's going to be it for the first episode of the Visto Show. Thanks, everybody. For those who tuned in live, we really appreciate it. And for those who are watching after the fact as well, what we'll be doing is going live each and every week and bringing in different professionals so we can cover different aspects of the immigration journey. In this case, we're luckily joined by Sonia to do a deeper dive on the legal side of immigration. We'll be bringing on experts in recruitment, job search, relocation, all that kind of stuff. Sonia, really quickly before we go, if anybody is interested in getting in touch with you, learning more about your services, if they need help with immigration, where do you recommend that they go to find you?
So I'm usually pretty loud on social media. So if you follow me on LinkedIn under my own name, Sonia Mirbaha, or SMB Business Immigration, which is my firm, you will be able to see all the updates about immigration. If you want to get in touch with me, the best way I would say is emailing me. The email address is sonia@smblaw.ca, or visiting the website, which is smblaw.ca again. Nice and short. And I'm pretty flexible. I'm pretty fast in responding to emails too. So I kind of amaze a lot of clients sometimes. So if you have any questions, by all means, pop it up with an email and I'll try to get back to you all.
Awesome. Thanks again, Sonia, for giving us your time. What we will do is we will stick links to all of those as well as the Visto.ai portal in the description of this video. If you guys do need more help with the immigration process or even beyond the immigration process, definitely check us out at Visto.ai, the free immigration platform. We have guides on express entry, study permit, work permit, finding jobs, all that kind of stuff. So check it out there. And we will be live again next Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern. So make sure you're following us on Facebook and or YouTube. One day LinkedIn will give me the thumbs up for LinkedIn Live as well, and we can go live there. But until next time, thank you again, Sonia. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video.
It was a pleasure to be with you here today.